Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with Consensus Network. We are in a bear market with cryptocurrency. That is an understatement, right? And there is no doubt about that. But how long will it last? I have no idea. However, one day, bull market shall return, just as the dotcoms did after the bubble burst in the late 90s. And then we're going to see the blockchain versions of Amazon and Apple skyrocket in value. That's what I think is going to happen. But in the meantime, you know as well as I do, it is winter. Now, so what do you do in the winter? It's a time where you learn about projects and buy them at a steep discount and then just wait. And the truth is that the vast majority of these projects, these cryptocurrencies, will probably never recover. A lot of them will go out of business. But the good ones will come back with a storm. So how do you spend your time during this period, during this winter? If you want to be part of this eventual boom, you spend time now learning. You become part of the conversation. And you can't do that if you don't speak the language. And that's where my guest today really shines. He's one of the best teachers in the blockchain space that I have yet to encounter. His name is Chris Coney, and he will be my guest after these messages. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Consensus Network is Chris Coney. Now, Chris is a blockchain educator and founder of Cryptoversity, and also hosts a podcast called The Cryptoverse. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Buck, thank you for having me, mate. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. So, I haven't had any fellow podcasters on, and this is kind of gives sort of a broader approach, I guess, than a lot of the guests that I've had on previously. So first of all, let's give us some background. I know you're out there in the UK, and how did you find yourself in the digital asset space, and when did that happen?
That was funny you paused there because you said, how did you find yourself in the blockchain space? Which is very apt, because I honestly came to crypto having done a very deep self-inventory about what the hell I was doing with my life. So I'll give you some context for that. Computer science graduate. I've just been fascinated with computers since I was like knee-high to a grasshopper, as my dad would say. The first computer I ever got was like a 486. It was a Packard Bell. So that was my first experience. I used computers for a good 5 or 6 years before we first got a dial-up modem. And so I saw the birth of the internet. I saw, the whole PC revolution, cartridge-based computer games. My dad, actually, he's been self-employed for as long as I can remember. He drove buses for a while, and then he set up convenience stores, and then he went into, you remember VHS tapes, right?
Yeah.
When that sort of took off, he had a rental store, and then when computer games took off, he added like computer game rental, so you could rent a cartridge and play the game. If you liked it, you could buy it, right? So, but that was all the rage back then. You don't really do that anymore. I don't think. Rent games, still rent movies, but you don't rent games anymore. So that was whole part of my whole indoctrination into the tech business and my getting some affinity with the digital world. So it was just in me, and especially getting into the internet with a 33K modem when Ultra Vista was around and all this other stuff. So I saw all that pre-Amazon, right? And then, so because of that background, when I came to like, what am I going to study at university? I was like, I don't know. I don't know why they expect kids to have their whole lives figured out or their careers figured out at that age. But it was precious. I was like, what do I do? So my logic was, I'm going to take a subject I'm interested in, which gives me the best chance of getting a good grade. Because I figure, a good grade in a reasonable subject is going to give me the best springboard, even if I don't go into tech in the end, right?
Sure.
That was my logic, right? So that's what I did. I didn't find university that difficult because of my background. I'd already self-studied a lot of stuff. So, 3 or 4 programming modules and all the rest of it. But then the thing happened again. You get to the end of your studies. And then this is a very interesting point in life, I think. And of course, at the time, I wasn't privy to how profound it was. But on reflection, when I reflected on that part of my life, I thought, that's the first time when you have to actually make sort of a decision where your life is going to go. Because up until that point, you've sort of got everything, the next steps laid out for you. You go to school and then high school, and then we have college, which is a step before university. So you could say, well, you don't have to go to university, but it is a logical next step.
Sure.
Just the momentum system carries you that way, right? Which is
Yeah.
what I did, because I had no alternative, I didn't know what else to do. But then when you finish your degree, yeah, you can go on to do masters and PhDs, but it's not as the momentum sort of stops at that point. You're a graduate now, right? And going into the workforce is then, the natural thing to happen. But there I am going, okay, I've got this computer science degree, still haven't got my life direction or my career direction figured out. Panic, right? And all I can remember thinking back then, Buck, was, oh no, I'm going to be the last graduate to get a job, right? Because again, everyone's getting jobs, and I start reading these statistics like, oh, the economy's pretty good. 2004, I think it was, something like that. So only a small percentage of graduates are still unemployed after 3 months or whatever it is after leaving uni. And these statistics are rattling around in my head, and I'm like, I don't want to be one of those. I just don't want to be the last graduate.
Yeah, right, right.
Unemployed. So this I didn't take any time to figure out where I wanted to go in life. I just panicked and it started applying for all kinds of jobs, hotel manager jobs. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And because I didn't get any of these jobs, because deep down I didn't really want any of them, right? So eventually, after 6 months of doing this and burning through a load of cash, traveling around and, snatching about, I figured, okay, right, let's just take a chill pill a minute and figure out like a conscious choice here. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, well, in all of this, I figured one day I was going to do what my dad did, self-employed, go and start my own business. And I was like, well, since no one else is giving me a job, I may as well give myself one, right? And pull that whole thing forward. So that was it. 22 I was when I went to my high street bank and says, hey, bank manager, lend me £36,000, will you? Which is about $50,000, unsecured, because I want to start this here web design business, right? And I said, sure, right? No problem, right? It's 2005. They were throwing money all over the place.
Sure.
Like, this is pre-2008 financial crisis, different economy.
Yeah.
The thing is, at that age, I didn't have the worldly awareness that I now have about the financial system. So that was just the world that I knew. Everything was booming is just what I knew. And you go to the bank, ask for 36,000 quid. There you go. Job's a good one, right?
Yeah.
So I took that. That was painful though, because what I did, and again, this is all hindsight, right? What I did was I took a whole bunch of money and started a business with no life experience really, and no career experience of any kind. I hadn't had a job anywhere other than working at my dad's computer store, right? Because by this time he's got a PC store selling computers and repairing them and so on. But that's not really the world of work, right? You'd have to deal with office politics and arrogant bosses or anything like this, promotions and work-life balance. He's working for your dad, so kind of easy times. So I struggled mightily because I just wasn't equipped. I didn't know how to sell. I didn't know how to do customer service. Didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know how to do accounts. Didn't know any of this. And it dawned on me when I'd started the business, right? And I was like, oh, goodness me. So that really was like sink or swim kind of a situation. So I did that for about 7 years. Like I originally bought this franchise of this web design company, which probably saved me in a bit because it was like training.
Some structure,
right?
Yeah.
Right. What I learned from that is, especially in that case, is that generally speaking, it was true with this one, because the franchise fee was like $30,000, there's actually more money in that for them. So once they've got you as a franchisee, even with a 10% royalty on your gross sales, which is what they charged you after that, it takes them a hell of a long time to make another 30 grand, right? So it's more profitable for them to focus their marketing efforts on getting new franchisees rather than your ongoing success. So it was very much like, there's the training, off you go. And I was like, oh no. So I was no better off inside the franchise model, really. So eventually I left that and went independent, and then did a similar thing, but just without all of the fees and franchise fees and all that kind of stuff. So that was a pretty miserable time, that, because I just find it so difficult to sell. That was just like the hardest thing for me. Kind of an introvert, you can imagine being kind of a computer science guy, much prefer, the sanctity of code logic and certainty around that. And when you've got to go like have doors slammed in your face, and that just hit me so deep.
Yeah.
The worst for someone like me. It was just the worst career choice ever. But I didn't even know that was what I had to do until I had to do it. And then I was like, now I've got the bank loan to pay back, had to do it. So it was excruciating. That whole year process, I was miserable. So it got to the point where I was so miserable doing it that I was like, I know I don't know what else to do. I'm just getting to the point where, like, not this. I just can't do this anymore, right? And the reason I didn't quit before that was because I had no alternative, right? It was almost like better than the devil, until it wasn't, right? And I was just like, I'm sick of this, just absolute misery. I can't live like this. So this is like 29, 30 years old. So I just, by this time, took on a co-director in the board meeting. I said, it came out of my mouth. It was one of those things where you think you say it in your head and you actually say it out loud. And I went, Glenn, I don't want to do this anymore. And I went, oh, I just said it. And he went, well, if you don't want to do it anymore, there's no point, is there? And he was like super nice about it. So we did a deal. He bought me out and I bailed.
Perfect.
1st of February 2013. That was it. I was officially unemployed with, my severance money.
Yeah.
For my equity. So that's where I was. That was the year I discovered Bitcoin. It's I don't think that's a coincidence, right? Because I wasn't looking for it. I didn't find it, but then I was open. I had no career, so I was open to everything. And then I started researching this and that and the other. And then
did you just run into it? Were you on a forum or something, or how did it come to you?
Interesting. It didn't get my attention right away, I'll be honest, because being in the tech business, always reading the journals and this and that and the other, and you always hear about something like a flipping transformer nanofiber technology that's coming down the pike, right, or something like that. And you go, that looks interesting, but it's so experimental. Most of it you never hear from again until 20 years later, right? Bitcoin seemed like one of those things. When I first came across it, I thought, that looks interesting. But then I bumped into it again and again and again. By the 6th time, I'd got enough crumbs to go, I think I should take this seriously. And then when I turn my attention towards it consciously, down the rabbit hole, there I am.
What was it about Bitcoin that, certainly the tech side I get, but at that point, what was it that kind of, caused you to get the virus?
Sure. So my tech background helped a lot because I was able to appreciate that aspect of Bitcoin. But in this 7-year experience where I'm, struggling, barely treading water, trying to figure out how to make this business successful, that spun me off into studying sales training. And then eventually you study like business strategy. And then I start thinking, well, I'm part of this thing called the economy. How does that work? Can I get some leverage there? That leads you into studying the economic system, leads me to, and then I went completely mad. Did a bunch of courses on how to trade the stock market, Forex, just to understand that world, right? So this is all building me. And then I found out Federal Reserve System, the whole fractional reserve. And I'm like, oh my Lord. So what started out as me just trying to solve my problem of, my small business problems, I ended up studying the whole economic system. So I was primed in that regard, right? And it seemed like gold was the only answer to another 2008 financial crisis. It was the only thing that semi-exists outside the financial system. Semi-exists outside the financial system. So then when I studied Bitcoin, I was like, oh my goodness me. I have this axiom which goes, you never quite know what you're being prepared for. And when I ran into Bitcoin, and a lot of people describe this, it was almost like all of these almost unrelated subjects that I'd studied, computer science and game theory, systems theory, and economics and all this sort of stuff. It was all pointing to a hole that Bitcoin then filled. It connects all of these things together, all things I was interested in. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was actually made for this. Not only made for it, but my whole life has almost been leading up to this point. When I look back at all the experiences, I was like, this is what I was put on this earth to do, to educate people about crypto.
Did you start mining it at that point, or?
I didn't. No, that didn't actually appeal to me. When I sold my business to my co-director, that's when I did a real deep self-inventory, because I'm like, I'm not doing another 7 years of that. This time, whatever I throw myself at, it needs to be, what I'm designed for. So while I'm figuring that out in 2013, which the end of that process was kind of my key skills are, I've got this little thing on the wall. It says my giftedness zone is like as a professional communicator in the area of technology, yada, yada, yada. That was my giftedness zone. So I figured that out. And then I discovered Bitcoin. And then I saw the gap in the market was like, well, no one understands this thing. Time for me to become a crypto educator, right? Because just the two met.
So is that when you started Cryptoversity? And that was in 2013?
It was.
Wow.
Originally, I thought I'd just make one online course. But then I quickly figured out, even though I made a 60-lesson course, I'm like, barely scratched the surface.
Right. I did see something on there that said it was the first course of its kind, and I was intrigued by that. But I didn't realize 2013, you were way, way ahead of the curve.
Right. I describe Cryptoversity as the world's first online school to teach courses on Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchains, because it was the first official school dedicated to that subject.
So you ultimately build a business around something that you believe in, which was Bitcoin.
Oh, absolutely.
When did you start buying cryptocurrencies?
I think it was in 2013. My first Bitcoin purchase, I got it off localbitcoins.com, where you can find a person-to-person trader type of thing, and it was $350.
Yeah, not
Which is
a.
part of my research. You got to buy some, right? See how it works.
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't go back there again.
You can see it either way.
Yeah, that's right. I want to shift a little bit. I've had a rash of Bitcoin maximalists on the show. If you look, who's been on lately, well, most of them are people who just believe, Bitcoin is the project. It's right. The coin, and everything else is a shit coin, right? I know, right. And we're not here to give financial advice or anything like that, but obviously you don't really view this space that way. Can you talk about sort of your larger perspective on distributed ledger technology, blockchain, et cetera, and how Bitcoin fits into that compared to, say, other projects?
Yes. So this is interesting. So the reason I say it the way I say it, which is like Cryptoversity teaches Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchains, is that I see it like, like those Russian dolls where you get a big one, you open it up, there's a smaller one inside, you open that one up and there's an even smaller one, it goes all the way down, right? So that's how I see it. So it's like Bitcoin is a specific project, an example of a cryptocurrency, which fits inside the cryptocurrency Russian doll, which fits inside the blockchain Russian doll. But you could actually go one step back from that and say, blockchain actually fits into this bigger Russian doll called distributed ledger technology.
Right.
Because you can have a distributed ledger without a blockchain, a la Ripple or many of the other ones like Stellar and so on. Yeah, they're decentralized ledgers, but they're not blockchains, right? Blockchains is a specific chain of time-stamped blocks, a block being a list of transactions, which lists things in the order they happened and has consensus in the network, right? But like actually Dan Laramie did a talk about this, that there are private applications for these distributed ledgers as well, even to keep honesty within, say, a corporation. Say if you've got a global corporation, you could have 4 different departments within that corporation on 4 different continents running a version of the database, a copy of the database, so that no one can, even within the organization, cannot corrupt the data. Right? Everything is logged. So if you know who changed what, and all 4 of those departments who are in the same company but really don't, talk to each other or have any need to, right, can all keep the data in consensus and prevent internal corruption. So the big bubble, not bubble in terms of financial markets, I mean the big circle that encircles everything is the DLT stuff, distributed ledger technology. This is like, how do you track ownership of anything and make sure that can't be corrupted? That's basically the fundamental problem that DLT solves. And then more specific applications go down from there into blockchains, hash graphs, DAGs, all this sort of stuff.
So let's talk about something that I think I've had this question a few times and I've explained it. I'd love to get your explanation of it. Is, I get these email questions that are, hey, I hear IBM is doing their own ledger. I hear their own cryptocurrency. I hear that Chase is using a blockchain. Well, what's the point then of having, an Ethereum, an open source blockchain if all of these companies are doing their own private blockchains? How do you answer that?
Yes. It's a very good question. We are in the melting pot phase where everyone's trying everything, which is fine. So if you think about it, if you are a very powerful corporate player in the old financial system, or even in the old tech space, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable building on a platform that is built by, managed by your peers, right? Other corporations. So like Hedera Hashgraph, have you heard of that one?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, of course you have. You've interviewed it.
Yeah, I'm in the pre-sale. Okay, I'm rooting for it.
That's super. So they are a good example of that. So
yeah.
versus Ethereum, the Hedera hash graph, the actual mining process, they don't have miners, but the mining equivalent in the Hedera hash graph, the Hedera company has, the human beings have had applications for miners, and they've manually selected blue chip corporations to be the miners. And they've picked like 40 or 41 of them, they're council members, as they call them. So they have service level agreements, they have performance criteria, and so on. So pros and cons. So the average libertarian isn't going to like that because there's just too much of a strong, there's too much of a human hand in it. But that's okay, because the beautiful thing about the world we're going into is finally we'll have free choice. And that's why I alluded back to when I was studying the problems of the world economic system. It felt kind of hopeless in the sense that we were all trapped inside this big circle called like the fiat economy, right? And there was no way out. And if you had power in that system, you could just squeeze everybody else. And the way I see it is that when the Satoshi white paper came out that described Bitcoin, it's so I can draw with my hands here, a big circle, and then this little tiny circle bumps up against it, which is almost like an entirely new economic system that is connected to the old one, but not exactly a part of it. Now, the size of the old financial system as a circle is like the size of the sun, and the little tiny circle that is the crypto economy is like a pea right now, bumping up against it. But gradually, what we're going to see by people building new crypto systems and by people exchanging value from one system to the other is that the relative size differences between these two economies, I believe, will come to the point of equilibrium, where you'll basically have both of them working side by side, right? With liquidity flowing backwards and forwards. But then we'll have absolutely free choice, because you can live entirely in the crypto world if you want to, in the DLT world. You can live entirely in the fiat world if you want. You can be in both camps, right? Based on how the external economy in the world is working, right? So value will be able to flow, and then power will be much more difficult to keep hold of, right? By manipulating the system, because there's two systems to choose from.
Right.
So that's really the way I see it going. Right?
The other way that I have explained this a few times, the idea of, companies just having their own blockchains, is it's sort of the difference between, back in the 90s when, the internet came out, a lot of companies started, well, we're just going to do an intranet and we're just going to communicate with one another that way. And so it's a difference between an intranet and an internet, for one thing. Mance Harmon also explained this in a different way. Mance Harmon, who's the CEO of Hashgraph, as you know, right. When he was on the show, I asked him, because as you know, Hashgraph has the private blockchain, and then they have the public blockchain with Hedera that, the main net has started. They haven't distributed the tokens. It's like, what's the purpose, right? What is the purpose? And I think that what he told me, I think, made a lot of sense for me in terms of thinking about the company level use of distributed ledger versus the public. He said that the private level would be, which is not Hedera, it's the Hashgraph company, was really focusing on companies that wanted to communicate within their own ecosystem, right? Whether that's or companies or industries. For example, you take banks or whatever, being able to communicate with one another. But that Hedera and the public ledger was designed for out-facing businesses, where it was required to interface with the public. So, and in that scenario, that's where you needed the open source, staking by, millions of people, etc. Does that resonate for you?
Yes, and well, I'd say more no than yes. I'm not going to say yes or no, because that's a stupid answer. So I'm going to say no on this basis. So even within a private ecosystem like dark markets, dark pools, right? Those banks don't trust each other. How can you, right?
Sure.
So they also need, because again, these consensus systems, it's the Byzantine generals problem. It's like, how do you trust a communication line that isn't trustworthy, right? How do you trust other parties that you have no relationship with? How do you make sure the message gets there and is authentic? When you receive one, how do you know the message is authentic, right? And all that kind of stuff. So that would work. You could have a dark pool right, of 5 banks who just operate a little private one like that.
Yeah.
But if they want to be trusted in the outside world, well, they don't have to run that on the public blockchain. This is the thing. You can link them together. The amount of information that you publish to the public blockchain could just be a single transaction per day, which communicates the state of your private ledger at the end of the day, which means at any point in the future, you can prove what the state of your private ledger was at that point in time by rehashing that the network state. And if it matches what you publish to the Bitcoin blockchain, you're telling the truth, right? So I think this is going to be huge, because that's what maybe Ethereum will end up being, right? It will be the ultimate record of all of these, side chains, if you want to call that, private chains, whatever. And the Ethereum public chain, which is ownerless, is truly decentralized, and it has no particular power structure, will be the most trusted network that everyone can almost back up the state of their private chains to, should they ever need to audit themselves, right? Or
well,
prove to lawmakers.
For example, in the case of Chase, I think Chase is building their own, quote unquote blockchain, but it's really, they're building something on top of the Ethereum network. Isn't that correct?
Well, sort of. This is a little bit confusing. So these open source networks. So Ethereum is both a network and a software, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same as Bitcoin is both a software and a network. So Ethereum is open source code, which you can download today and launch your own Ethereum network, right? You have to call it something else, but it will essentially be the Ethereum network. So there are things like the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, which their intention is to establish a completely new Ethereum-based network, which uses the same technology as the Ethereum that we know, but is an entirely different distributed ledger altogether with an entirely different set of data. So that's a little bit confusing to the average, what should we call them? The average observer of the crypto space. Is when you hear, oh, they're building on Ethereum, that needs breaking down. Are they building on the Ethereum public blockchain that we know, or are they using the Ethereum technology to establish their own private network?
Yeah, they're just sort of creating their own little fork.
There you go.
Yeah. And you see that with, for example, we know Worldwide Asset Exchange, WAX, also did that with EOS.
They did. They are doing. They're rocking it.
Right. So speaking of EOS, this is something I want to talk to you about, because I know that you and I both have an interest in EOS. Absolutely. And we haven't really touched on this project on this program, but I've mentioned it. Explain EOS, first of all, and tell me why you like it.
Okay. First thing, no one really knows what EOS stands for. The creator kind of left it up to you to decide. People say it's Ethereum on steroids. People say it's
Ethereum,
all kinds of things, right?
Ethereum operating system. I've heard that one.
Right. Eternal operating system, whatever. Right. But operating system is a good word. So the biggest difference between Ethereum and EOS is when you're building an app for Ethereum, it's almost like buying a circuit board and then writing machine code to run on that circuitry. That's hard. That was it was called computer systems, was the module at university, where they taught us assembly code. It's one level of computer programming abstracted from binary. So it's got, the alphabet to do commands, but it's almost binary. It's horrible. I hated that module. I barely passed it because I hated it so much. Horrible. Never going to use assembly language again. So Ethereum apps at the moment are notoriously difficult to create for that reason. So we don't have the Windows or the iOS equivalent, right? So as soon as, say, iOS came along, well, the number of developers that were able to build apps for your iPhone just exploded, because the iOS, the operating system, provided a layer of insulation in between the machine and the human. That's what EOS is designed to be. Rather than you having to talk to the blockchain, which is essentially the machinery, EOS is like Windows. It sits on top of that. So you can just get on and write your app, and EOS will handle all of the communication with the machine, if you like, right? So that's basically what EOS is. It's a blockchain operating system that makes it easier to build apps.
Why is it more? Because one of the big things we talk about is, maybe you can explain why the advantages of an EOS in terms of scalability.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the people throw words around in the crypto space like centralized and decentralized. Now, they are they are said in the past tense, like centralized, decentralized, as if the process is complete. It's not, right? So on either end, there is a 100% centralized system. On the other end, there is a completely decentralized system. I don't think either of those actually exists, right? Even like Facebook and Google and all these, they're not entirely centralized because they've got servers all over the shop. So nothing is entirely centralized. And there's different types of centralization as well. Yes, it's a single company, but it's not a single server and it's not a single service and that kind of stuff. So it's a spectrum from totally centralized to totally decentralized. When it comes to these blockchain networks, you can move the slider. This is in the design phase of these networks. On paper, you can go, okay, let's play around with this slider, moving it up the centralized end, up the decentralized end. What you find is the further towards the centralized end you put it, you get better performance, right? But you also lose trust, right? Because it's becomes easier to control. That's the problem with centralization. It's centralization of power and control. So in an entirely centralized system, you've got one guy that's got access to everything that can change anything. Not good. On the decentralized end, everyone in the network has a totally equal distributed vote in the network, power in the network, wealth in the network. That doesn't exist either. When you put it down that end, it's incredibly slow. It's like it almost grinds to a halt because to get consensus in a network like that, you'd have to get every machine to synchronize before you could move on.
Which
right?
is Bitcoin.
So, no, Bitcoin isn't entirely decentralized, right? It just wouldn't work. So Bitcoin is cut sort of not all the way down the decentralized end entirely because no such system exists. But you've got to make a choice about where on this scale you build. So Ethereum decided, well, we can let anyone be a miner, right? And that gives you the Ethereum network that we've got today with a limit of about 15 transactions a second. The reason Bitcoin is so slow, quote unquote, at 3 transactions a second, and it does a block every 10 minutes, that was an intentional design choice. Satoshi Nakamoto intentionally slowed the Bitcoin network down so there was sufficient time for everyone to come to consensus and for the whole network to synchronize before one of those blocks was set in stone. Because once a Bitcoin block is in there, the chance of that being reversed drops to 0 pretty damn quickly, right? So that's the trade-off, though. You've got, with Bitcoin, mega immutability, and Ethereum, mega almost complete immutability, but it costs you on the performance end. So along comes Dan Larimer, who's looking at this and is like, it's not going to work, right? In the real world, if we are going to build apps, right, any kind of apps that are going to equal the performance of the apps that most people are used to, and again, we need consumer adoption. That's really where the money is. And they're not going to stand for this kind of performance, right? 15-second transactions and paying a fee and all this sort of stuff. It's like, it's not going to work. And that's what I admire about Dan Larimer. He starts with the market, just like a true entrepreneur, and then reverse engineers it to the tech rather than the other way around. Let's build this network and then see what, who we can sell it to or what we can build on it, which is why Bitcoin and Ethereum are struggling today, because it's gone back to front instead of front to back. So Dan Larimer was like, okay, what we're going to do is he invented this delegated proof of stake system where you have a limited number of miners, right? And in his experimentation with his previous projects like BitShares, when he left it to a free market vote about how many block producers or how many miners there should be, there was 101, I think, originally in BitShares. But the optimal number, based on actual real-world empirical experience, was about 15, I think it was. So in EOS, you have 21, right, to give some leeway there. You have 21 block producers that are mining the network at any one time. And then you have an outer circle that are all the backups. And the block producers or the miners in EOS are elected by the token holders. So unlike Bitcoin and Ethereum, where it's basically whoever's got the most money to buy a bunch of mining hardware and who can ever find the cheapest electricity, gets the mining rewards, and you can do that anonymously. In EOS, you can't really do that because you have to campaign to be elected as a block producer. So you have to say, this is who we are. This is our hardware. This is why we're trustworthy. This is why we're a better block producer than anyone else, and so on. And it's liquid democracy because the EOS vote happens every 3 minutes. So if you're a block producer and you're earning rewards for creating blocks and securing the network, if your performance falls off, or if you get caught in a scandal, 3 minutes, you could be, replaced by someone else who got elected. So it keeps everyone on their toes. The benefit of cutting down the number of miners that have to reach consensus down to 21 is you get massive performance gains. And when I say massive, I mean, so far, the record for on-chain transactions on EOS is 4,000 transactions a second, right? And it's only been out a few months, so it still needs optimizing. But even now, today, EOS can do 4,000 transactions a second. And when I say Bitcoin can do 3 and Ethereum can do 15. So that's the kind of performance gains you get by pulling this slider more towards the centralized end. Because Dan Larimer said it's not decentralization we're after. And people go mad when they hear that. It's true, though. What we're going for is censorship resistance, high performance, usable applications. And if that means we have to pull the slider a bit further down towards centralization, we only need enough decentralization for immutability, privacy, and performance to take it to market. So I think EOS has this great trade-off between centralization and decentralization to be the best of all worlds.
Yeah, no, and it's funny that you and I talked about that once. You were kind enough to have me on your show, and I think this is something that I think maybe there is so much ideology in this space, and the thing is, those are the really really smart computer scientists who are also very ideological based, and that's where the Bitcoin maximalists are for the most part. But the fundamental problem, as I see in these situations, is, again, people out there who are adopting this technology, they don't care about decentralization. I mean, they don't even know what that means, right? All these people on Facebook, they know that Facebook is stealing their data, but for the most part, they don't seem to care. What they care about is how quickly something works and how it improves their lives. And I think that what we're talking about a little bit is exactly that. Whether, we talked about XRP on your show with Ripple. Same thing. There are, people who are very anti-Ripple. And yeah, if you are a purist in, about decentralization and all that, then yeah, absolutely. But in reality, the banks are using it. It has a tremendous utility, so it's probably going to be something of value. Let me back up a little bit, because I think I've not actually addressed, in the most simplistic terms, there are these consensus mechanisms that we call proof of stake and proof of work. Mm-hmm. You, being the eloquent educator that you are, how do you explain this to somebody who doesn't really know this world very well?
So the purpose we call them consensus mechanisms. That's just a fancy word for how do you get all the computer systems to agree on what's the state of the network. And when I say the state of the network, it's like, how do we get everyone on the network to agree what everyone's account balance is, right? Because if you can't do that, you can spend the same money twice and the whole system falls apart, right? Mm-hmm. These networks allow you to do something that's both digital and scarce. Never before was that possible, because before Bitcoin, you could just copy and paste the digital money as many times as you like and it loses its value. But with a consensus network that everyone agrees, this is my account balance, this is your account balance. And then when I send a book, everyone agrees that just happened, right? And then if you want to game the system, you have to somehow strong arm everybody in the network into buying into your corruption. It's impossible. You can't communicate with that many people and so on. So that just doesn't really work. So that's what a consensus mechanism is designed to do. How you approach this, though, there are several different schools of thought. So proof is literally like proof in a court case. But in computer systems, you don't have to argue it. You just use encryption. It's mathematics, right? A proof is like, I can prove that 2 + 2 = 4 because the rules of mathematics say that the plus sign adds these two things together and everyone gets the same answer, right? So you can prove what the answer to 2 + 2 is. And everyone that runs that formula should get exactly the same answer always should be the case in every case without exception. That's the beauty of mathematics, right? It's objective language. So sweet. So that's proof, a cryptographic proof, as we call it. Can you prove something mathematically, and could someone else repeat it perfectly? Yes. So that's great. So proof of work, right? So this is like, you got to prove you did some work. What proof of work does in Bitcoin is this blockchain thing. So every 10 minutes, a new block is added to the Bitcoin blockchain, which is like, now we're going to scoop up all these transactions that were submitted in the last 10 minutes, and we're going to confirm them by adding them to the distributed ledger, right? So they're officially, those transactions happened and everyone agrees, right? Most of the time in any 10-minute block, there are more transactions submitted than can fit in a block. So someone has to decide, gets this little bowl and picks out a bowl full of transactions from this pool waiting to be confirmed, but not like the entire pool won't fit in the bowl, right? Which is a new block. So someone has to decide which ones go in the bowl for this 10 minutes. And that's the winning miner gets to decide, right? How do you decide who the winning miner is, right? Well, you use proof of work. So proof of work works like a lottery. So imagine if you just did like the national lottery like you have in any country, right? Everyone buys a ticket, you wait, you randomly draw numbers, and then whoever matches the jackpot numbers, right, they get to decide. So you do this with computers by having your mining machine basically guess what the winning lottery numbers are. So the Bitcoin software generates the winning numbers basically and hides them, right? Itself is autonomous. So no one in the world knows what it is. Only the Bitcoin software knows. It generates them, encrypts them, hides them, right? And it says, right, miners, guess what the winning numbers are, right? And they all guess. And they can make as many guesses as they want, but they need really powerful computers to make as many guesses as they can as fast as possible.
Because it's a complex math problem, basically, right? That they're trying to get the answer to.
Numbers, basically, right?
That's all they're doing. It's random numbers. Because I was always under the impression that it was more, essentially, tough math problems that these computers were.
Technically, yes, but you don't really have to think about it like that. What they're technically trying to do is generate. Okay, do you want the technical definition?
Yeah, I do. Just other people may not want it, but I want one.
That's fine. So in cryptography, you have something called a hash function, which is a mathematical formula where you can put any kind of data in one end, but you cannot predict what the hash will be. So the hash is the thing that pops out the other end, right? So it's like if you're cooking a hash, you could throw in breakfast potatoes and a bit of ham and this and you make a hash. Or in England, we have a corned beef hash, for example. It's just a mishmash of stuff, right? So that's like how a hash function works. You throw a load of stuff in a pan. You're not quite sure what it's going to be when it's finished, but you throw it in there nonetheless. And you don't know what it is until you've finished, right? So that's how a hash function works. You can hash anything. I can take a screenshot of this call. I can hash the recording of this call because it's just data, right? Just ones and zeros in a particular sequence. You run that through a hash function and a hash comes out the other end, which is a long string of letters and numbers. It's in hexadecimal. Mm-hmm. It's A to F and a 0 to 9, right? That's the character set. So you can hash anything you want, right? Anything. You hash a song, hash an image, hash a logo, if you want to copyright it, for example. The benefit of doing that is that in future, if I have the hash of that song, say, and I hashed it back in 2009, in 2019, I can say, look, you run that MP3 file, the song, through this hash function, and I bet you this is the output. You do it, you compare the hashes, boom. That proves that, that was the song I hashed back in 2009. I own the copyright, for example, right? So in Bitcoin, it uses a hash function called SHA-256, SHA-256. So it's 256-bit encryption. So what the miners are looking for, any of you can look at this. If you go to btc.com, it's actually a mining pool, and you can actually see the winning hash from any given Bitcoin block. So what we're looking for right now is an output to the Bitcoin hash function that has a certain number of zeros at the beginning. Now, what you don't know at the beginning of any round of mining, you don't know what input will generate an output with 10 or 11 zeros on the beginning. You just don't know because that's how hash functions work. So you just make arbitrary guesses. You just throw all kinds of data into the hash function, see if a number comes out the other end with 10 zeros at the beginning, If it doesn't, you try again, right? That's the mining system. That's proof of work, right? So all the Bitcoin miners around the world are racing thousands, trillions, and trillions of guesses per second to try and be the first one to find a nonce. It's called in mathematics nonce.
Right.
Nonce is that output, that hash output with a certain number of zeros on the beginning. If you find it, you announce it to everybody and say, this was the input that generated the output. Everyone can then check it because you tell them what to put in, right? You say, this is what I put in to get the nonce. All the other miners run that through the hash function. Chris, you did get it, because they can all verify it.
Right.
That's proof.
And the winner gets some Bitcoin, right?
12.5 Bitcoin.
Yep. And then the other part of this that I think it's important to just point out is that computers that are guessing, millions of times per second, as Chris, that's where all the energy output is, because we hear about proof of work and energy and everything.
Right.
So on the other hand, then there's proof of stake. Now, this is a totally different thing right now. So now, in general, we're talking about, okay, for example, I own EOS and I have staked it. What does that mean for me?
Just to tie up the proof of work bit, when I find that number, that's proof I did the work, because the only way I could have got that number with the number of zeros on the beginning is if I did a ton of work.
Right.
I mean, computer work, right? So that's how everyone knows. It's like you were either like the luckiest guy in the world with the first thing. It's just so unlikely because these numbers are astronomically huge.
Right.
So, but the problem is you need tons of expensive hardware and tons of electricity to run these processes, to make all these guesses, right? So you're like, okay, how else can we do this? How else can we decide in a fair way who gets to add the next block to the chain? And that's an important job, because that person decides which transactions get confirmed next, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to pick somebody, right? Because we want all these transactions in order. We don't want everyone adding transactions at the same time to the official chain, because we need consensus. We need to pick someone. You get to decide, right? And it doesn't want to be the same person every time. So proof of stake, it's a similar thing. Proof of stake. So what you have to prove in a proof of stake system is that you have a stake in the network, which in cryptocurrency world means you own a bunch of tokens, right? So you've got something at stake, economic value. You probably bought or earned those tokens somehow, and you lock those tokens up. That's what it means to stake, right? And instead of selecting the winning miner based on who did the most hashes and found the nonce, in a proof of stake system, you basically pick someone at random, right? Based on all the tokens that are staked, you basically pick a token at random out of the millions that are staked to say, who owns that token? And Buck goes, it's me. You go, right, Buck, you're the winning miner. You get to decide on the next block, right? So, and then we do it again, right? Everyone decides a stake and pick another token. Who owns that? Chris owns that token, right? You're the winning miner this round. Now that requires no computation power at all, nowhere near as much as proof of work, because you don't do any computation, right? The winning miner is picked based on how much you have at stake. So the way you increase your chances of winning a proof of work game is you buy more hardware, you make more guesses, you burn more electricity, make more guesses, right? In a proof of stake system, you stake more coins, right? If I own 10% of all the tokens, if any of those tokens get picked as the winning token, I get to decide on the next block. And if I get to decide the next block, I get the reward, right? The newly created tokens. So the problem with proof of stake is that generally the rich get richer, because if I've got 10% of the tokens, I'm more often than not going to be picked as the winning miner. I'm going to be issued with new tokens. If I hold them, I now own like 10.1% of them, gives me more chance of winning, and it's kind of a snowball,
Right. So, the proof of work people often cite the fact they always say that the proof of stake is less secure. Is that true in your view?
For the reason I just stated, which is you can essentially buy the vote. And what I mean by that is while the crypto economy is its own system, it's not disconnected from the existing financial system. Meaning, if you generate a hell of a lot of value in the old financial system, or you've managed to accrue billions of dollars by other means, you can transfer that value into the crypto space, right? So say a brand new proof of stake network launches, you could use a whole bunch of that economic activity. Like you could take $1 billion of those dollars, buy up like half the token supply or something, and then, have a disproportionate control over the network. What protects against that, though, to be fair, is that if you went out onto the open market and started buying, tokens in a proof of stake system with the intention of acquiring $1 billion worth, well, the price would grow exponentially because of your own purchasing, right? The first token you buy would be at the market price, but then you would be pushing the price up every consecutive token that you purchased. You follow me?
Yes.
So while technically at the market price of say $2 in EOS, you could buy 2 billion of them for $4 billion or whatever. It will never happen because there isn't 4 billion EOS tokens for sale at $2. There's only a few on the order book, right, that are for sale at $2, and then the next lot you'll have to buy at $3, and then $5, and $10, and $100. So you'll just burn through all your cash, and you'll end up with a fraction of the tokens you thought you would. So that's somewhat of a protection,
Interesting. So this is so there are other proof of stake things. I know Ethereum is talking about potentially going to proof of stake as well. Mm-hmm. The other way I guess you can protect against this is having a very, very large market cap, right? So presumably you make it so it's virtually impossible for someone to own, so much of the network.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Because I think, and I know Mance, talking about him about Hashgraph, and I know that's not blockchain at all. And quite honestly, I don't really understand the gossip protocol and everything related to it. But I do know that was one of the reasons that they wanted these, Hedera tokens staked with these large companies for a period of time until market cap caught up.
Yes. They're intentionally starting off more centralized so they can prevent it sort of becoming too chaotic in the beginning. When it's just finding its feet, they're basically going to strong arm it by putting very strong boundaries in place to stabilize the system early on. And this is how smart they are. They're just super smart because they've looked at these networks that just explode into the free market and then abject chaos, right? And it just doesn't develop because, yeah, great free market anarchy, blah blah. But in the real world, it just, after the initial burst of innovation, it kind of gets stuck, like where Bitcoin has got stuck. So they are going to gradually seed the market with the tokens, right? Gradually over time, so that just for the interest of stability, really. I think that's a smart move because I think in long term.
I do too, and I've talked to it's interesting because people have such strong feelings about Hashgraph, but when I look at the way they're approaching it, with, as you described, I think very well, an increased decentralization over time, it's a very, very smart way to do it. And a lot of people don't like the fact that there's a patent on the code, but it is also, anybody can build on it. They're not requiring anybody to pay them or even tell them about it. They're just saying, don't fork. And
that's actually the purpose of the patent. When I asked Mance about that, it's more of a defensive patent than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually very, very smart. And we're looking right now at the ecosystem right now, and the forks are hurting. They're hurting this market at large, in my view. I mean, if you look at
confusing the hell out of people, at least, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times. I mean, I just, I've been listening to, I'll listen to random shows and stuff, and you hear the mainstream guys. One of their main arguments against this technology, especially when they look at Bitcoin, they say, well, yeah, Bitcoin had 21 million max, but now they've got all these forks, and there's Bitcoin Cash, and there's Bitcoin, and that fork to ABC and SV, and they missed the point. Yeah, but it's not Bitcoin, right?
Well, they have Bitcoin in the name. That's where the sort of similarity. It's not an inflation of the Bitcoin token supply, which is, I can't believe people make that mistake.
Well, they do. And I think that fundamentally, though, if we're hoping for appreciation in this market, we have to get some clarity, for smart money around that. And I think it's a smart move. I mean, yeah, okay, fine. Maybe you're giving up some of the true open source nature of this thing. But again, what makes sense? What's gonna give enterprise confidence rather than just being part of this anarchy and saying this is that appeals to a lot of people on an ideological level. It's just not terribly practical. So
Absolutely. That's back to the design principles of the system.
right.
There are always trade-offs. Bitcoin and Ethereum are not perfect. They don't score 10 out of 10 on all of the traits of these technology networks, not by a long shot.
Yeah.
Performance is like in the toilet.
Yeah.
Right? Fine. Be uber decentralized if you want to, but you're going to be stuck with 3 transactions a second.
Yeah.
And then you have to innovate on top of that, right? Because the base layer just won't scale beyond that, which is why they're building second layers and things like that.
Well, and to that point too, I think that when you look at these different protocols, whether that's the Bitcoin blockchain, you look at Ethereum or EOS, what we're really that's the groundwork. That's the underlying framework, and ultimately what we're looking for is people's ability to build businesses, applications on top of that. And so
solve all your problems.
Right. So that's really what this is. I mean, talk about an area that's completely in its infancy, right? I mean, this is literally, we're waiting for decentralized applications. The only, apart from Wax Token, I don't know a blockchain that's doing a whole lot. So.
Okay. So let's talk about a couple of, like, to make it obvious, you really want to go to the extreme. It's like, okay, so Satoshi Nakamoto invents Bitcoin. Why? Right? Well, because in the Genesis block of the Bitcoin network, he hashed the front page headline from the Times newspaper from 2009, which is like, it's from the UK. It was like, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. So Satoshi hashed that headline into the very first Bitcoin block. So clearly communicating to everybody what Bitcoin was for, right? It was a new monetary system that wasn't controlled by a central bank, that had a completely transparent, predictable monetary policy that you could see out to the next century, not to the next quarter if Fed's going to raise rates or lower rates or, whatever. Because really, well, the central banks have got like 2 tools. They've got like interest rates, inflation of the currency supply. That's it.
Right.
They can create currency or destroy it, raise interest rates or lower it. That's it. Right. And actually they have no long-term view, because it's just impossible to predict the future. Right.
Right.
Bitcoin gives us a ground state. This is how many Bitcoins will exist ever. This is the issuance rate. These are the times when they're going to be issued. Go nuts. Right.
Right.
So that was the problem Bitcoin solves, right? Peer-to-peer digital cash.
Right.
You said that you don't know a whole lot of blockchains doing a lot, right? And they need to solve real world problems. Here's another one. Gambling.
Yep.
Seems to be like on the cutting edge. Why is that such a huge thing? Well, because there's been so many scandals with online casinos.
Yep.
Right? Tipping the odds in their favor because they're opaque.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, even in Vegas, right? Yes. Nevada Gambling Commission comes in and inspects the tables. Oh, great. Another third-party organization they have to trust, right? That they're not, they're not just rubber stamping it. Yes, this card shuffler is fair. Get out of here, right?
Yeah.
Get right out. Don't believe it or don't believe it. It's just not trustless, is it? It still requires trust in the Nevada Gaming Commission, right? Don't want that. Don't want that at all. I want to be able to verify it for myself, which is why on Ethereum and on EOS, the online casinos are like the most popular.
Right. Right.
Because if you roll the dice, right, it's fair, provably fair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's huge for people.
Well, listen, Chris, this has been really fun for me. This has been a great conversation. Tell us a little bit more before we go. I want people to know about Cryptoversity, how that works, and the other information you put out in terms of your YouTube channel and your podcast.
So I've just launched what I'm calling Cryptoversity 2.0, which is a complete overhaul of the platform. So a new technology platform, new set of courses, whole new thing. So now how it works is very simple. It's more like Netflix for crypto education, where there's just one monthly tuition fee. That's it. Get access to everything, including the private chat server with all the students. So you can ask me questions and all that kind of stuff. It's just much simpler. You just sign up, pay monthly tuition, cancel anytime, get access to all the courses, eat all you can eat. When you've had enough, cancel, go your own way. Right, easy peasy. So that's that. I've got a new affiliate program. So if people want to help me promote crypto education, it pays a passive income in Bitcoin. So you can only get paid in Bitcoin, by the way. I only pay in Bitcoin, which sorts out the banking issues. So if you're in any one of the 190 countries in the world, if I have 190 countries of affiliates to pay, don't matter to me. It's just a bunch of Bitcoin addresses, right? So that's also me trying to get the Bitcoin out there.
Yeah.
So that's why I do that.
Well, make sure to send me the link. So if somebody wants me to get a commission on that, then they can use the show notes. But if you don't want to, that's fine too.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the student pay is the same. It's just the money I would otherwise give to big advertising corporations, and instead I'm giving independent promoters. Just again, I'm doing that on purpose because I'm doing everything I possibly can to help this revolution. And giving fiat currency to Google is not the one. That is not the one at all. I'd much rather buy Bitcoin from Coinbase and distribute it to independent promoters who believe in this. Right?
Do you have to pay with Bitcoin for Cryptoversity?
Oh, no, not at all. No. You pay with a credit card, PayPal, all the normal stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, got it.
And then for the brand new people to crypto, you can actually follow Book's affiliate link for this. But if you're still in the why crypto phase, I've put together this 3-part video series, which is free. It's called How the Crypto Revolution is Bigger Than the Internet. And it'll take you through like setting up your first Bitcoin wallet, how to buy your first Bitcoin, how to spend your Bitcoin on Amazon for a big old discount, the 3 C's of crypto, blah, 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 right? So you can go through that absolutely free. And at the end of it, the 4th video is like, do you want to sign up as a student? So check out the Books affiliate link in the show notes if you want to check that out, or you can just go straight to the courses if you wish. So that's that. If you want to follow my ongoing news and commentary, just go to YouTube and type in The Cryptoverse, as in crypto universe, and you'll find me.
Fantastic. Again, Chris, thanks so much for being on Consensus Network today.
Folks, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. First of all, I want to encourage those of you who are interested in diving deep to check out Chris's Cryptoversity course. You can find a link to that at consensusnetwork.io. As you can tell, he's a very, very good teacher, and he's a good guide to learn from. Go to consensusnetwork.io. You can also find a bunch of tutorials there that are totally free that we've done to try to get you involved in the space if you're still kind of thinking about it. Now, the other thing you can do at Consensus Network is actually write me some questions, or you can leave a voicemail there, or you can simply email info@consensusnetwork.io. Now, so after all these weeks, because we took a few weeks off, there were actually no questions submitted for me to answer. And so I'm actually not surprised. I think the interest in cryptocurrency right now is very low. It's human psychology, for better or for worse. When Bitcoin was trading at $20,000, everyone wanted everyone wanted to know everything about cryptocurrency and about investing in different projects, etc. And everyone in the podcast space was booming. And you look at out there right now, a lot of them just haven't even released an episode in months and months and months. Now, why? Well, because Bitcoin is, it's trading under $4,000 right now. Altcoins are down like 95%. The interest is just dried up. The psychological interest is dried up from, most people out there. So right now is a good time to learn. Is it a good time to buy? Well, maybe it is if you don't need the money for a while. The problem is that we don't know how long this bear market will actually last. So does it make sense for you to consider shifting your attention and resources and current income to other investments right now? Maybe. I kind of like the way, Tyler Jenks has talked about this, and I asked him, well, aren't you going to be afraid of missing out on the bear market? He said, or on the bull market? He said, we won't miss out on the bull market. You know, we may not pick up quite as much of the upside because we get in a little late, but we're not going to miss the bull market. That's the kind of thinking that I think is important in this time and place right now. You know, since I launched this podcast in September, I have to tell you, I've been religious about putting out 2 episodes per week. And right now, though, given the fact that, you know, it seems like there isn't as much going on right now. It's winter. There are, you know, bits and pieces here. I think we're going to stop necessarily doing this on a complete regular basis. Things are moving slowly. So Consensus Network's going to shift right now into more of a hibernative state. In other words, we're going to slow things down. We're going to shift to a more periodic schedule during this winter. And when there are things to talk about, we'll talk about them. When we have good guests and things are happening, we'll talk about them. But we won't just automatically have shows for a period of time. I think there's other things to think about. In the meantime, make sure that you subscribe to the show so that when we do have new episodes, and again, it may be once every couple weeks or whatever, that they'll pop up on your screen in real time. But you'll know that we're doing shows that are actually, you know, that are meaningful, like this one that we just did with Chris. Also, I would encourage you, if you don't, to listen to my other podcast, Wealth Formula, if you're not already doing so, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, that kind of investing where you're investing for cash flow and investing in real estate, et cetera, it may not be as sexy, but going back to fundamentals and investing in real assets is always a good thing to do, especially when times get tough. Anyway, that is it for me this week on Consensus Network. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.